All right. Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me well? I would like to welcome you to this session on climate, conflict, and China in Africa. I have the privilege to chair this session, and I'd like to start with an acknowledgement of country. We acknowledge and celebrate the first Australians on whose traditional lands we meet and pay our respects to the elders of the Ngunnawal people, past, present, and emerging. Thank you for joining us here today. Today we have panelists who are practitioners, panelists who are in academia. We have panelists with experience in Africa and in Australia. And I think we will have some rich insights coming out of today and hopefully some good discussions. We have presentations on important themes for Africa that can guide engagement and aid to the region. I hope we will all be listening attentively and thinking about how this could have impact on us and our work, and thinking of good questions for the Q&A session that will be at the end. So there are many varied countries in Africa, and all of these countries do not often get the spotlight or serious engagement, which I think they should. And so I'm glad that we have this time to deep dive into research and issues on the continent. But without further from me, I will introduce the panelists for today. We have Dr. Dessie Ambaw, who will be joining us virtually. And he is a lecturer in economics at the University of South Australia Business School. He's a member of the Centre for Markets, Values and Inclusion at the University of South Australia. And he holds a Bachelor of Arts from Bahir Dar University and an MSc in Economic Policy Analysis from Addis Ababa University, and an MSc in Economics from Copenhagen University, and a PhD in Economics from Adelaide University. So that gives you a flavor about Dr. Dessie, who has had, prior to this position, experience as a postdoctoral researcher at Adelaide University, a data analyst, consultant at the World Bank, and he has many teaching engagements currently and in the past. His research interests are in the areas of international trade and economic development, program evaluation, and applied econometrics. He will be giving us a presentation on an economic study on aid and conflict in Africa. And then we have with us in person Mudasser Siddiqui, the Deputy CEO of Impact at Plan International. And he has over 15 years of humanitarian and development experience across Asia, Africa, and the Middle East. Through his employment journey with government and NGOs, he's got experience in monitoring and evaluation, emergency response, policy research, and advocacy related to humanitarian affairs. He has worked in Ethiopia before, and he was country director there since 2021. He has master's degree in medical and psychiatric social work from Tata Institute of Social Sciences, Mumbai, India. And with Mudasser is Claire Walker. She has an honors in public health, where she developed a food environment mapping tool to map traditional food environments in the Pacific. She then worked in community level food security before completing a master's in international relations. She's worked with Oxfam Australia now for 4 years and is a contract management coordinator, where she manages an extensive humanitarian portfolio, including project focused on the hunger crisis in the Horn of Africa and a climate resilience program in the Pacific. We'll be hearing more about those programs in Africa today. And then our fourth panelist is Kudakwashe Praise Mutukura. He's a third-year PhD candidate at RMIT University, Melbourne, Australia, and he's studying towards a doctorate in global, urban, and social studies. He researches on human security implications of China's non-interference principle in Zimbabwe, looking at international politics and security. Earlier this year, he did fieldwork in Zimbabwe, and we'll be hearing from him on that. Very exciting. He has qualifications of an MA in conflict resolution from Turkey and a BSc Politics and Public Management honors from Zimbabwe in 2015. He's had experience at Higher Life Foundation, one of Africa's largest nonprofit philanthropic organizations, and doing research assistance and working on humanitarian response to Cyclone Idai and a cholera outbreak, both in Zimbabwe. He's had many scholarships, and he's an executive member of the Development Studies Association of Australia. So these are our esteemed panelists who we will be having present to us today. And we'll begin with Dessie online. And please remember that we'll have a Q&A session after the presentations of all our presenters, where we'll come up and discuss with you. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you, Estelle, for the excellent introduction. So my presentation for today is, as you can see from the screen, it is the effect of food aid on conflict. This is a new evidence. And this is a joint work with Nicholas Sim, who was my PhD supervisor. Currently, he's at Singapore University of Social Science. And when I go to the motivation, so as we know, food aid is it's very important to address global food challenges. In 2028, we have around 258 million people faced with acute food insecurity. And emergency food aid is a vital instrument to address this food insecurity. But there is a wider concern about the impact of food aid on civil conflicts. So the key question here is, does emergency food aid alleviate or exacerbate the risk of civil conflict in recipient developing countries? Okay, and this question is very important because understanding this issue will be crucial for designing food aid policies for conflict-sensitive areas. So the context, so emergency food aid, it's often deployed in areas that are already experiencing fragility and conflict. So food aid may have a positive effect. It will reduce grievances by alleviating hunger and suffering in that area. It can stabilize communities, and it can also prevent migration. However, it has also negative effects. For example, if food aid is captured by the armed groups, then they may use that food, they will sell that food aid or emergency food aid, and then they will just use that to buy different fighting devices. So there are already few studies that address the causal effect of food aid on conflict using very robust identification strategies. To just some of the existing literature, one of the well-known paper is Nathan Noon and Quinn. This is a paper in American Economic Review. And for the first time, they estimate the effect of food aid on civil conflict, and they use US wheat aid on different recipient countries. And they find food aid actually increases the risk of civil conflict. And this is the finding of this study is supported by different other studies like Chu 2017, Narang, Wood, and Molfino. So these are different papers. They support this finding. And recently, there are also some studies that find negative effects. That means emergency food aid tends to reduce the risk of civil conflict in aid recipient country. One prominent example on this is Mary and Mishra 2020. This is a paper in World Development. And some studies also find mixed evidence. That means food aid may increase or may reduce the likelihood of civil conflict. So this question is still a hot debated topic, and I think we need to get further insight from new studies. And one area that we find a big limitation is the identification strategy or a methodological limitation. Several studies also mentioned some of the weaknesses of these previous studies. So that's where we try to contribute in this literature. Okay, so what's our approach? So here we try to address these gaps using a new IV that exploits variation induced by natural disaster in other sub-Saharan African countries. So I will come back to this one later. So when you come to the contribution, so data, we use 40 sub-Saharan African countries from 2000 to 2020. And I think sub-Saharan Africa is very important because this region is one of the major recipients of food aid. And conflict is, it's very severe in this area. And we also use emergency food aid from all 30 DAC countries. So that means we consider food aid from all the major donor countries. And we propose a new instrumental variable. So we employ the number of natural disaster affected people in other sub-Saharan African countries. So as we know, natural disaster include earthquake, volcanic eruption, extreme temperature, storm, flood, landslide, and so on. And we just use the number of these natural disaster affected population in other sub-Saharan African countries to explain food aid, and we just test how food aid affects the risk of civil conflict. We also analyze minor civil conflicts, that is, if the number of people died because of the conflict is 0 to 25, then that is a minor conflict. Sorry, if it is between 25 and 1,000, that's minor conflict. And if it is more than 1,000, that is civil war. And we also analyze all civil conflicts. And we have a lot of robustness checks, falsification tests, and so on. Okay, and our main finding is emergency food aid does not affect conflict incidents. That means emergency food aid is it's still a very important tool to avoid food insecurity. And this is very important for policymakers and aid organizations. Okay, and this is the structure of my presentation. Next, I will go to methodology and data, and then I will briefly explain the results, and finally, I will talk about the conclusion. So regarding the methodology, as I mentioned before, our main contribution is a methodological contribution. And to estimate the effect of emergency food aid on civil conflict, we apply two-stage least square estimation method. And this approach helps to address potential endogeneity issues because there may be endogeneity issues due to reverse causality. That means food aid may increase because there is conflict in that area. So that means conflict may also affect the amount of emergency food aid. So there is a reverse causation. There could also be omitted variable bias. That means there may be some factors that affect both civil conflict and the amount of emergency food aid. So if we don't control this in our regression, then there will be omitted variable bias. And because of that, OLS will not be a good estimation strategy. So for that reason, we just apply two-stage least square. Now, in the two-stage least square estimation method, so that means it has two stages. The first stage will be, we will estimate the number of natural disaster affected population in other sub-Saharan African countries on the emergency food aid of a particular country. right? So it's exogenous to that particular country because the number of disaster-affected population is it's exogenous because of the natural disasters to that specific country. And then in the second stage, we'll have the estimated emergency food aid from the first stage, and we'll estimate that the effect of the predicted emergency food aid on civil conflict in the second stage. Okay, and as we all know, the key assumption in two-stage least square is the instrument will not affect directly civil conflict, and I think we think that that one is true. So that means the exclusionary restriction assumption is valid. So we believe the number of natural affected population in other sub-Saharan African countries will affect civil conflict only the amount of emergency food aid. So I will show you some figures that will support this assumption, this very important assumption. So if you want mathematically, this is our regression equation. So this is the first stage. So we have the IV. This is the number of natural disaster affected people in foreign countries. And we have emergency food aid. So we'll estimate this one. We'll get the predicted value of this, and we'll put this here. So this is the predicted value. And then this is the second stage. So we can identify the value of beta. And as I said before, conflict it's a dummy variable, and it will be 1 if there is civil conflict, and it will be 0 if there is no civil conflict. And there is minor civil conflict and major civil conflict, or a civil war if more than 1,000 people died because of the conflict. Maybe I will skip this to save time. And I think this is a repetition. As I said before, we consider 40 sub-Saharan African countries, and we limited our service to 40 because of data issues. And the time period is from 2002 to 2020. And these are the different sources of data. So we use UCDP for armed conflict. We use OECD statistics database for emergency food aid and other aid variables. We use emergency event database, IMDAT, for natural disaster data. And we also collect other data sets from World Development Indicator and other different databases. This is the summary statistics. Now, if you can see the first one, this is the most important variable, civil conflict incidence. So this is the total number of civil conflict, and you can see we can witness civil conflict in 15.7% of the data. So that means in the different year country combinations, civil conflict is very high in sub-Saharan Africa. And minor civil conflict, it's 14.2%. And major civil conflict, it's relatively it is small. It's 1.9%. And we have also other variables. Now, I think this one is very important, and this is easy to understand. Now, if you see this chart, on the horizontal axis, we have emergency food aid received by the different countries. This is in millions of US dollar. And we have average yearly incidence of overall civil conflict. Now, this is average values, but you can clearly see there is a positive relationship between the amount of emergency food aid received by the different sub-Saharan African countries and the risk of civil conflict. So from this scatter plot, we can say there is a positive correlation between emergency food aid and incidence of civil conflict. Now, for the IV, as I told you, we use the number of people affected by natural disaster in other countries. Now, for this one, you can see, for example, if you take Ethiopia here, when other countries receive more aid, then the amount of emergency food aid received by that country will decrease. That means there will be a competition for aid for these aid recipient countries. So there is a negative relationship. So that means if there is high number of natural disaster affected people in other countries, then food aid will decrease for that specific country, and that will also affect that will affect civil conflict. And this is our baseline result. So first we have the OLS fixed effect regression, and the other two columns report the two-stage least square regression results. Now, I want you to focus on column 2 and column 4. So in column 2, you can see we have controlled so many country level coverages, country fixed effect, year fixed effect. We have also controlled weather and country specific time trend. And you can clearly see emergency food aid doesn't affect civil conflict, or there is no correlation between these two. But when I do not control the country specific time trade, it looks like emergency food aid tends to increase civil conflict. So this is what we see from the scatter plot. But when you control all the relevant factors, then there is no positive, there is no statistically significant relation between these two. Similarly, in the two-stage least square, you can clearly see there is no statistically significant relation between emergency food aid and the risk of civil conflict. This one is for minor civil conflict. Again, it's the same. For major civil conflict, again, column 4 shows there is no statistically significant relationship between emergency food aid and civil conflict. Okay. We have also conducted falsification tests, and we find that our baseline results are valid. And to save time, I will just quickly go to the robustness check. We have also tried alternative instrumental variable. Here, we just use the number of natural disaster affected people in non-immediate neighboring countries to mitigate migration, because if there is natural disaster in Kenya or Somalia, maybe natural disaster affected people may come to Ethiopia, and that may probably increase the risk of civil conflict. So to control all these concerns, we just construct our IV from non-immediate neighboring countries. We still get statistically insignificant relationship between emergency food aid and civil conflict. We also use system GMM. We apply higher order spatial lag to control conflict spillover. Again, we just find that emergency food aid doesn't have any statistically significant effect on civil conflict in sub-Saharan Africa. So this is a summary. So in this research, we focus the effect of emergency food aid on civil conflict in recipient sub-Saharan African countries. Our key contribution is, first, we provide region-specific estimate on the effect of emergency food aid on conflict by focusing on sub-Saharan Africa, where both emergency food aid and civil conflict are relatively higher. We also propose a novel methodology to identify the causal effect of emergency food aid on civil conflict. And our main finding is, regardless of the scale of conflict, whether it is minor or major or all conflict, emergency food aid does not significantly affect civil conflict. And this shows that emergency food aid is still an important international tool to address food insecurity in sub-Saharan African countries. Policy implication, concerns about the emergency food aid exacerbating conflict in sub-Saharan Africa may be overstated. So globally, yes, it may increase or it may decrease, but in sub-Saharan Africa, it looks like this concern it's overstated. And yeah, so I think this is a very important study, and it shows the weak relationship between food aid and emergency food aid and civil conflict in sub-Saharan Africa. And I think it's a very important implication for policymakers. I think that's all from me. Thank you so much.
Hello? Maybe.
So Oxfam and Plan implemented projects in Ethiopia and Kenya through the Australian Humanitarian Partnership, or the AHP, over 2023 to 2024. The AHP is a partnership between the Australian government and Australian NGOs, which aims to save lives and alleviate suffering by supporting partner countries, local organisations, and communities to prevent, prepare for, respond to, and recover from disasters and other humanitarian crises. So the AHP provided a combined 20 million Australian dollars to respond to the food security situation in Ethiopia and Kenya. So several humanitarian crises have compounded across Ethiopia and Kenya. The region experienced a prolonged drought with several failed rainy seasons, which was the worst in 40 years, as well as conflict and border disputes resulting in widespread displacement, leading to crop losses, food insecurity, and increases in gender-based violence. Oxfam and Plan responded to this in the Somali, Oromia, Amhara, Afar, and Tigray regions in Ethiopia, and Marsabit, Turkana, Tana River, and Garissa in Kenya. So this graph shows the food security situation in Kenya from February 2023 on the left, and the projected from March to June 2023 on the right. So 60% of the population in Marsabit and Turkana experience critical and emergency levels of food insecurity, as defined by the Integrated Food Security Phase Classification, or IPC. So the orange colour that you can see, that's the critical level, and the red is the emergency level. And so in the wider arid and semi-arid land regions, this was about 5.4 million people affected. There's limited data available on Ethiopia, but this was the food security environment in June 2023, which shows parts of Tigray, Afar, Amhara, Somali, and Oromia in crisis and emergency levels of food insecurity. So that's that orange and red. And level 3 and above means that urgent humanitarian assistance is required. So 5 AHP responses have been launched since 2023, led by Plan, Oxfam, and World Vision, with focus areas in food security, nutrition, cash assistance, WASH, and protection. And both Plan and Oxfam respond through local civil society organisations who implement the project activities at the community level. So this is important to both Oxfam and Plan to ensure that there is ownership and voice from the communities impacted. And these are just some of the logos of the partners that we're both working with. So I'll now hand over to Mudasser to take you through the plan.
Thank you, Claire. So yeah, let me talk to you about Ethiopia, a country that self-proclaimed itself as the heart of Africa. And there are good reasons for it. It is the second most populous country on the continent. And in the context where this particular program was implemented, what we had in Ethiopia was a prolonged civil war in the northern part of the country. It had droughts, one of the worst in the 40 years in Horn of Africa, leading to resource scarcity, rainfall deficiencies, and then also conflict spilling over in Oromia and in Somali region. Ethiopia hosts one of the largest refugee population in that part of the world. It also had the distinction just before the crisis in Sudan, also hosting the largest internally displaced population within the country because of conflict and climate. Migration, due to drought, migration through to conflict, ethnic and political, is something that has been the mainstay for Ethiopia for a while. And unfortunately, no immediate signs of situation changing. Plan International in Australia, along with its partners, we responded in the Tigray, Oromia, and Somali region through a multi-sectoral programming, of course, impacting around 150,000 people. More than half of them were, women and girls across all of these regions. And the interventions that we had were, focused on livelihood support, food aid, multipurpose cash assistance, protection services, as well as screening for malnutrition. And some of the statistics here, in terms of the number of people reached are over here. So I wouldn't necessarily get into the details there. Some of the case studies, I think what I want to highlight is that how the aid can not only just meet the immediate needs, but could also have the impact on rehabilitation and long-term, mitigation of the impacts of conflict or climate. In this particular case study, Fiori, which is one of the women in Tigray region, region of more than 6 million people living through a siege and conflict, was considering of migrating out of the country to go to Middle East and work as a domestic help because there was no food effectively. Plan and partners through our humanitarian response supported under AHP, engaged with her. She was provided with multipurpose cash that not only helped her meet the immediate needs related to food and nutrition for herself and family, but also to restart her income generating activity, which gave her confidence of staying back and being able to, spend time with the family rather than to leave children behind, as many young Ethiopian women do, leaving families behind and moving to Middle East to work in domestic labor. Another case study is about women, old women in Oromia, who was, as I said, that part of the country, 40 years worst drought. What is happening in Horn of Africa is that the droughts are becoming more severe and more frequent. We have had 2011, 2017, and then this was 2022. The impact, the scale, the intensity is increasing. And communities, most of these are pastoralist communities. They are losing assets. They are not getting sufficient time to recover from previous droughts, loss of cattle, and therefore also agriculture support not being available has a very big impact in terms of their food security. And in this particular program, we provided support through this chickpea assistance program, where we helped the local community in planting and are harvesting drought-resistant, crop of chickpea that not only helped in terms of, their immediate food security, but also build confidence in terms of feeding their families and accessing better access to animal feed, which, as I said, is very important in these communities because they are pastoralists. And nutrition and health, parts of these Ethiopia, Claire earlier mentioned there was no data. The reason there was no data is that it is very political in Ethiopia. The government doesn't allow, the figures to be made public. Estimates range from 21 to 22 million people out of 110 being in need of food assistance. Malnutrition, one of the worst. In parts, it is, near famine or almost famine. And what this particular program did was really the screening and connection with the service providers. Some of the programs run by Plan and other partners who were running therapeutic feeding programs focused on young children, but also pregnant and lactating mothers. And in this particular case, we worked with the health providers on training them and screening and providing support to manage the malnutrition. And really, I think the last point here was really around focusing on recognizing the importance of climate and gender inclusive solutions. As I said, droughts are more prominent, more severe, and communities having less time to recover. The gender aspect is very important. As a girls' rights organization, when we did our own assessment on the ground, what we saw was that the girls were eating less and they were eating last. They were being pulled out from school, forced into marriages for basically providing money so that the family can feed the rest of the children. So what we did as part of this particular program was really looking at, working at the local level on very culturally sensitive awareness programs, linking, women with protection services, empowering local humanitarian actors and institutions, and, constantly having a gendered lens to our program analysis and implementation. And, looking at the climate change, a lot of advocacy, even within this framework of AHP, with the development partners on the ground to not only focus on the immediate humanitarian need, which AHP was meeting, but also to look at how the resilience building can be brought in. Let me hand it over to Claire.
So in Kenya, the arid and semi-arid lands covers about 80% of land mass, and it's home to 36% of the population. Many of these communities are pastoralists, meaning they depend on animals for food resources and livelihoods, and they may move about depending on the seasons and resource availability. So food insecurity triggered by a combination of cyclical shocks, including 5 successive below average rainy seasons, compounded by conflict and insecurity in the arid and semi-arid lands, resulted in 15% of the population experiencing IPC4, which is that red level emergency from those graphs earlier, requiring immediate assistance. Failed rainy seasons resulted in consecutive failed harvests and widespread livestock death. So this woman here, she had 50 animals, but only 7 had survived at the time of an interview in 2023. So she's standing there with her perished livestock. And so the negative implications of this is that it causes reduced income, resulting in less access to food in terms of availability to purchase, as well as accessibility to food. Water access also remained critical as water pans and dams were unable to recharge to capacity and boreholes were yielding low volumes. This also increased pump breakdowns and infrastructure malfunctions. And without safe water, disease outbreaks increased, such as cholera, which negatively impacted children and vulnerable people. And there's also the impact for women for gender-based violence when walking long distances to get water. So lack of livelihoods and resource scarcity over food and water results in increased gender-based violence. But there's also the breakdown in the family and community protection structures, which is coupled with historical unequal power relations between men and women and intercommunal conflict. So Oxfam's role through the AHP is to act as an intermediary between the donor and the local civil society organisations who implement the project. So this allows us to operate with a number of unique benefits. So first, we partnered with 4 local organisations across Marsabit and Turkana, who we've been working with across other projects and who instinctively understand the communities that they work with, as well as the context, and they're also able to reach hard-to-reach communities. So this included providing 80% of the budget to local CSOs to implement the work. Second, the design of the project was integrated with and leveraged off pre-existing projects. So this meant that whilst the funding was focused on the hunger crisis, we were able to take learnings from other projects, such as including resilience and climate change focused activities, like building kitchen gardens with drought resilient crops, coupled with nutrition education on what to grow and what to feed children. So this gives the added benefit of supporting food security whilst at the same time supporting livelihoods and climate resilience. And lastly, we partnered with the Arid and Semi-Arid Lands Humanitarian Network, or the AHN, which is a platform that facilitates and coordinates humanitarian work within the region with 30 local and national NGOs. So this provides opportunities for CSOs to engage in cross-learning, and collectively the network has an array of expertise from cash programming to women's rights, monitoring, evaluation and learning, WASH, gender, advocacy and community mobilisation. And there's also the benefit that this allows us to help strengthen local coordination in the humanitarian sector. So Oxfam's response focused on food security and nutrition, WASH and protection. So food security was supported through a multifaceted approach of multipurpose cash assistance, dietary diversification and food preparation education, establishment of kitchen gardens and malnutrition support for maternal and child nutrition. We also trained community health promoters to support with referrals to government institutions and for monitoring of malnutrition cases. So over 12,000 people, including 10,000 children, were supported through these activities. And this is a quote from an interview with a participant that said, "The challenge we experienced before the project came in was food insecurity. The project came in and assisted us in buying all types of food that we didn't know before, like potatoes and vegetables that improve the immune system of our children, and after they have lacked a balanced diet for a while. The project played a big role in ensuring that we have improved food security, and we also understand the benefits of providing food and nutritious value to our children, especially the younger ones below 10 years. WASH activities included rehabilitating and solarising boreholes, installing water storage tanks in schools, school hygiene education promotion through school health clubs, including a focus on menstrual hygiene management. 5 villages were supported to gain open defecation-free status, and we also provided training to water management committees to oversee the maintenance of rehabilitated water infrastructure that was built. So the Narangawar Water Users Association said that AHP has solved a total solution of lack of safe water for drinking and animal use. They provided us with water tanks, storage tanks, water kiosks, and water treatment chemicals. The project trained one of the members to become an expert repair person for the water structure, and the storage water facility has ensured safe storage for domestic use and drinking, which has solved the water crisis in our area. And lastly, Oxfam responded through protection. So this included mapping referral pathways to develop a service directory, psychosocial support, emergency cash assistance, skills training for micro-enterprise, and awareness raising with communities, including targeted messaging with men. We also conducted alternative rites of passage sessions with students, which raised awareness of female genital mutilation, early marriage, and early pregnancy with girls and boys. So this was from an interview with a government representative in the gender department, and they said that we are grateful for the continuous capacity building for local leaders and communities, including integrating disability program and support for sexual gender-based violence survivors. We can confirm that we now have skills to provide support to survivors of gender-based violence, and we are also able to refer them to places where they can get support. This was not the case before we interacted with the project. So lastly, an external evaluation was conducted by an independent consultant on the AHP responses in Ethiopia and Kenya, and this identified strong outcomes and ongoing needs. So recommendations included that the responses in Ethiopia and Kenya consolidate gains through securing additional funding for longer-term implementation or engage with government to integrate activities into their programs. The evaluation provided an important evidence base which informed DFAT considerations to continue AHP programming in Kenya through Oxfam in 2024 to 2025. And so phase 2 will build upon pre-existing work in Marsabit and Turkana, and we'll also introduce activities in Tana River and Garissa, which were also affected by the prolonged droughts, but more recently by severe flooding as well. Thank you.
A pleasant morning to you all. Thank you, Estelle, for the introduction. So I'm presenting in the context of aid and security, and my research here is on Chinese aid and environmental impact, reimagining human security in Zimbabwe. So my research focuses specifically on Zimbabwe. And my results or my findings are not to be generalized for the rest of Africa, because Africa is a very big continent. So I'll take you to Africa. So the bigger map, that is Africa, and Zimbabwe is found on the southern part of the continent. And earlier this year, I conducted my fieldwork research in a district called Mutukura, which is found in Mashonaland East Province. So during my fieldwork, I took a picture that is Zimbabwe CBD called Harare. And also that is the view of the area that I went in Mutukura. So my methodology was mainly qualitative. So I conducted research, interviewing government officials, ordinary people within the rural communities, and also environmentalists, a number of stakeholders. So speaking of Chinese aid in Zimbabwe, Chinese aid has been contextualized and seen in form of infrastructural development, unlike Western aid, which used to come probably as funds given to the government and they do whatever that they used to do. Chinese has come up with the Belt and Road Initiative, where they are not providing handouts, so to speak, but they claim that they are contributing with infrastructure. That is what they say. So I did a recollection of some of the projects that they did recently, and there's the National Parliament, the Defense College, the plaza, and the extension of the electric generation center. The parliament, for instance, it costed approximately 190 million, and China said it is a gift. So I collected like a history of how China interacted with Zimbabwe ever since our independence. So during the liberation wars, China used to contribute with military support, military training, ammunition, and so forth. After we got our independence, Zimbabwe once had good relations with, let's say, the United States of America, the British, but because of the land reform, Zimbabwe was under sanctions from 2000, and it has survived under the sanctions up to now. And that gave a leeway for China to become our big brother, so to speak. But now this relationship is contextualized within the context of state-to-state relations. And now the question that goes to every Zimbabwean citizen on the ground is, how am I benefiting? Now, the question is, how do these Chinese aid projects impact human security and sustainability? And one may want to know the lived experience of human security in Zimbabwe, the implications of Chinese aid on the environment. So when I was in Mutukura, I was surprised. As you can see from the slide there, mountains are being leveled down due to Chinese mining activities, which is coming within the context of aid. That is how they are paying back. When China comes, it doesn't explain to us how much they are giving us. I think yesterday there was this session whereby the DFAT they did launched, how much are they contributing? It is so transparent, but with Chinese aid, it is difficult. I went to a company, a lithium mining company, which was recently established. I think it's for about 2 years. And I spoke with the farmer who used to farm at that particular area. So being shown on the board there, it's someone's field. They relied on agriculture and they loved farming. However, since the mining activities began, this particular company left their rebels in there, a lot of huge stones. And this impacted them when it comes to food security. They could not conduct their farming. So when I spoke with the government officials, like, what is exactly happening on the ground? They seem to be detached with the reality. Because to them, China is our all-weather friend. There's a mutual benefit. China does not interfere in our politics. So when it comes to state-to-state security, everything is good. But when it comes to human security, people on the ground, people are giving like a separate story. So when I was driving, I was actually in this one, it's close to one of the mine. This is a main road, and there dust is everywhere, the roads, there's no signage. You can see the community insecurity that comes through with this huge mining investments. People, the Chinese benefiting, probably the government elites also benefiting, but the people are at risk of respiratory diseases. And what is actually also more fascinating is these activities are also impinging on how people used to survive. People would go to the, let's say, to the river, fetch their water long back, but these days it's actually risky to do that. Why? Because there are now mining activities happening everywhere, even in the rivers. But if this development or this so-called aid would also contribute to alternative sources of water, that would have been better, but they are not. I want you to pay close attention to this picture I've highlighted there. That is a woman that is carrying a 20-liter bucket of water. She travels about 1 kilometer, I think twice or thrice per day, just to fetch like normal water. So if, let's say, a foreign nation is coming, or in the context of aid, and not providing alternative ways of survival, then it is now impinging on women per se. And now the question is, since China says it doesn't interfere with politics, to people, isn't it now interfering with human security? That is the question. And the question is, now how do we reimagine human security? Well, when I was talking to people on the ground, they seem not to understand what human security is all about. Because human security is an idea that came with through the United Nations Development Program in 1994. People spoke of Ubuntu. That is the way people in Africa understand security. And they said, in our society, I am because you are. If we are getting support, let's say from China, they should come and hear what we want as a society, not just to gratify the desires of the state or of the leaders. So human security on its own, it focuses on survival, livelihoods, and the dignity of the people. We embrace that concept, but also the element of Ubuntu is very important. And when it comes to China, there's also Confucianism. So there's need to link the two. So towards a holistic development model, there is need for Chinese aid to uphold both natural resources and a community well-being of the society, not just to say, as long as you're in good books with the government, then everything is okay. And also to development partners, it is also important to have that strong emphasis that human beings should be the referent object in their practice and aid. So I've got a lot of recommendations, but I'll go to the third one, which is incorporating Ubuntu philosophy into aid policies. It is very important to listen to the local communities, what exactly that they need, and bring project aid that addresses exactly what people want, rather than giving like a blanket cover and not know how exactly the aid is being implemented. And one may ask like, so what can I do as an international player? I've got a lot of recommendations for you, but firstly, there's need for support-driven projects to address local needs and vulnerabilities. For example, the globe is working towards addressing climate change, but people in the rural areas in Zimbabwe, which constitute about 60%, they are reliant on firewood. So if people are still cutting down trees just to get like the basics on a daily basis, we are not going anywhere in the world. And human security is an interconnected threat. Look at COVID. It started in China, but it impacted almost everyone. So if we are not committed to solve some of these problems together as a globe, then the consequences are coming to us. And China, in as much as it is doing good, but there is also now a gap in Zimbabwe because of the sanctions. We need more players to come and assist. I'll also end my presentation by saying there are institutions in Zimbabwe, but these institutions are not that strong. So there is need for development players that come and help strengthen the environmentalists that are at the Environmental Management Agency and give them expertise, know-how, and support, and also funding in order to enforce some of the clearly laid out laws. Otherwise, the people will always come up with the voices that are not heard. I also end by giving you an incident that happened here in Australia with the Jucan Gorge, whereby the company called Rio Tinto mined through this gorge, which was very important to the indigenous people here. It made a lot of noise here. This is just an example of how Zimbabweans are feeling at the ground when they see their mountains being mined, they are being leveled down. There are probably wells being dug, people mining almost everywhere without any control. And lastly, I thank you.
Thank you. I will ask the panelists to come and sit here now so we can have a bit of a Q&A and panel discussion. So I think you'll all agree with me that we had so much ground covered and so much that could be discussed. I will remind you that Dr. Dessie, hopefully you can see him above our heads, he is there, began with speaking to us about his study using instrumental variables to come to his conclusion that food aid does not increase conflict. If anyone has questions for Dessie, please raise your hand. I will, in a moment, come to the time where your questions can be asked. And then I'll also remind you that Claire and Mudasser walked us through their programs focused on Ethiopia and Kenya. Many stories from there, and the gender and climate focus that they have and have to have because of the situation on the ground there. And then Kudakwashe talking to us about the complexities of aid coming to Zimbabwe from China and the idea of human security. So I will open up. Please raise your hand if you have a question for any of the presenters, and the microphones can come to you.
Hi, William Lieben, Development Intelligence Lab. Question for Dessie, and thank you for sharing really interesting and clearly really relevant and important work in detail. In the first instance, it'd be just really useful if you could quickly clarify around incidents. So are we just talking about onset, or are there interesting other kind of wrinkles in the findings about, say, duration, intensity, and so on? Secondly, obviously not the place to kind of litigate in massive detail, but be interested in kind of reactions you've had elsewhere on the exclusion condition, and whether others have. I mean, my instinctive reaction was a bit of skepticism around, are there really not other links between the instrument and conflict incidents about, say, regional politics, financial flows elsewhere, or whatever it might be, and any reflections you might offer on why your findings are different from that pretty widely cited US food aid paper, which I think, among other reasons, so widely cited because the instrument seems so strong. Thank you.
Dessie, if you'd like to take that question.
Sure. Thank you so much for the question. So in this paper, we study the effect of emergency food aid on the incidence of civil conflict. So we haven't studied civil conflict onset or the duration of civil conflict or the duration of peace. So maybe that that one could be an interesting area, but we just focus on the incidence of civil conflict. And as I mentioned in the data section, if at least 25 people are died because of the conflict, then it is called a minor civil conflict. And if 1,000 and more people died, that will be a major civil conflict or a civil war. So our focus is only on the likelihood of civil conflict incidents. And regarding the exclusion restriction, yes, that's a very important question. And that's also a big concern for us. However, yeah, migration may probably affect civil conflict, and of course, the natural disaster may also cause migration. So we are now trying to control migration in our regression. And we have controlled like country fixed effect, time trade, linear time trend, and we have also controlled a number of country level covariates. I haven't shown you all these covariates, but we try to control as much factors as possible. And we believe that by controlling all this, our IV could be a strong IV. It could be exogenous. So I think we can still believe this is a good IV. And the other question is, how is our paper different from the US food aid paper by Nathan and Quan? So in that American Economic Review paper, their focus is the impact of US wheat food aid on civil conflict on several different countries. So I think, if I remember correctly, they have analyzed more than 120 or 130 food aid recipient countries. So that's a global or international study, but we just focus on only sub-Saharan Africa. Because in sub-Saharan Africa, emergency food aid is very common. Many sub-Saharan African countries are food insecure, and they receive a lot of emergency food aid because of the conflict, because of other reasons. And civil conflict is also very widespread. So we believe analyzing the impact of emergency food aid on civil conflict on these countries is it's very important for policymakers and for donors. So I think that's the difference. And the IV that is used by this US food aid paper is widely criticized. So there are several studies I have tried to show you in my presentation. So because of that, we believe we need to have a new IV, and that's where we try to contribute. So that's my answer. Thank you.
Thank you. Maybe I will take a question to Claire and Mudasser. With this idea of the difficulties of aid on the ground, what are examples that you found? Would you see small scale conflicts in communities? How are ways that you can manage complexities of bringing aid to people? I doubt in your experience it would be so large as people dying, but if you understand what I'm saying, taking it to the smaller level, the complexities of delivering aid, do you have some experiences or examples of difficulties and how you can deal with them?
Oh, thanks, Estelle. I think the complexities of delivering aid in Horn of Africa, particularly because of conflict, it is operating at multiple levels. Of course, the usual one in terms of the humanitarian access at a larger scale with the conflict. It is one of the deadly regions for humanitarian aid workers. But really at the micro level, any injunction of aid or support, whether it is through food or through cash, does have an implications around creating conflicts and amplifying the existing fault lines that exist in any community. The approach that Plan and I'm sure Oxfam and our partners in the sector have been taking and kind of improvising is really making sure that the identification of program participants, the identification of needs, interventions, and program participants is done in a transparent, open, and consultative manner. In addition to that, we also ensure that on the ground, there are mechanisms in place involving the local community representatives from a diverse group, women. So we also use this aid as a tool for gender equality, looking at people with disability, looking at ethnic, religious, or other forms of minorities in those communities, to be really involved in making sure that the mechanism through which we are delivering that aid is also inclusive, and it is ensuring transparency and accountability. And I think the third thing really that we make sure is that in our delivery, we clearly identify what are the feedback loops, safeguarding mechanisms or complaint mechanisms that exist or are set up during the delivery of the program, so that any issues, and there are always issues of X's name missing in the list of program participant, or the Y is getting more and Z is not getting enough, that they are all brought forward, and that local community representatives, along with our partners and ourselves on the ground, are clearly analyzing, addressing, and responding to those things. These are the things that have helped us mitigate, the local small-scale conflict that may exist. Thanks.
Yeah, there's a question at the back. While we wait for the microphone to get to you, I would want to ask Kudakwashe Praise, if you would see room in the complexity of the aid of big infrastructure or a mine deal that has been made at a certain level of government, but seems to be bringing human insecurity. Would that be the sort of space that other NGOs could come? Would there be an openness, say, around that mine? What are your thoughts on other players that could come in to mediate complexities and maybe sort of bring a teamwork element?
Sorry, can I jump in here? Because my question is actually related to this. And thank you so much for making all the four presentations are very, very informative. And thank you so much, especially for letting us know the situation in Zimbabwe, China in Zimbabwe. I'm Payfen from the Taiwan ICDF. We are the sole official agency for Taiwan's ODA. So I'm very curious about also, can you elaborate more on the situation? Because we can see a disparity between the people and the governmental officials. So the local people feel strengthened, but the governmental officials seem to still cooperate, continue to cooperate with the Chinese government and the companies. So is there a general public opinion in the society, or public sentiment in the society toward this situation, or is the situation only limited and known to specific local communities? And also, what do you see the solution for this? Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much for the excellent questions. So firstly, I'll answer about people's perceptions. So back in about 2016, the Afrobarometer conducted a survey, I would say, in Africa, and one of it was specifically for Zimbabwe. China's ratings, when it comes to how it interacts with the people, their investments, it actually went down instead of going up. And in my own research, because I was looking at human securities about 7 dimensions, environmental insecurity was the highest. People were saying nah, China is not doing anything. So that is about the perception. Then when it comes to development within the communities, the reality is China would come with a parliament in Zimbabwe, in Harare, the capital city, and the mining resources is happening, let's say, in Mutukura, 200 kilometers away. So if someone is coming and do mine something within your community and the development is happening somewhere else, then that one already, it is a problem. Then when it comes to the collaboration, teamwork, like how can other development players fit in? I think firstly, I need to explain how Chinese aid is coming through. We do have the government, yes, which is dealing directly with the government. Yeah, which is a little bit better, but we also have like private organizations that are coming. And based off on what people were saying, they are actually doubting if some of the so-called Chinese players are real Chinese players. They were thinking like it's a Zimbabwean, like politicians who goes to China, bring like an ordinary person and say like, this is a Chinese entrepreneur. So I think there is need for that level of coordination from China's perspective, and probably the Chinese government or the Chinese embassy to account who is in Zimbabwe and what are they doing. And are they also participating in the corporate social responsibility, I would say. So at the end of the day, there is a lot of, I would say like loopholes or things that needs to be done that other development players can play. I think Oxfam, Plan International, already they are there. And I think they do have their own methodology, but I don't know if they cooperate with Chinese aid. And also in my research, I could not get into the Chinese embassy because they could not allow me. They did not give me the approval, despite having all the ethics clearance. So when it comes to the communication, I think that one is lacking. And there is not enough data out there to know their modus of operandi. Thank you.
Thanks, Kudakwashe. And yeah, obviously, seems like people on the ground are wondering about legitimacy of different players. And I guess it speaks to the importance of transparency. But yeah, wondering of how people can work together is probably a challenge for all of us. Sorry, just checking it's on. With the issues that can maybe seem intractable or feels like I'm not responsible for that. I'm here in Australia. And so probably a challenge for us to think today on that. Yeah, again to you, Claire Mudasser, just on the climate related insecurity that people are facing. I think we can all see that only increasing, and you were already saying the frequency of these disasters that come that are used as instrumental variables. Yeah, can really maybe put people in traps more. And yeah, I guess for the aid community, we're all very aware of it. There's meetings going on, there's funding going towards it. But can you, speak to more of the considerations for climate that you have in your organizations or experiences?
So that's part of the reason why we leverage off pre-existing projects that are already focused in the climate resilience space. So I didn't speak to this one, but for example, in Ethiopia, we worked with one of the universities that was researching drought-resilient crop seeds. And so then we set up these little community gardens that were using these crop seeds based on the research provided that they were going to be a better long-term approach. And then the idea of having it in a community garden is that everybody can then access that resource. So you have a few members that get together and look after the garden and manage it, but then it's a free resource for the community to tap into and to be able to access those vegetables and crops. And that's particularly important when you have communities that are migrating around. So there's a central kind of spot that people can come to and come and go from. And that's where, you have a reliable access to food. But there's other kind of mechanisms that we have, like the kitchen gardens, for example, is another one. So having that kind of climate resilience focus, so we don't just come in and have non-food items or food items or cash. Like there's other mechanisms that kind of link with the climate resilience aspect of it. Do you want to add anything?
Yeah, I think what I would add is there are two other things that organizations in our sector, likes of Plan and Oxfam particularly focus on. And I think one is that particularly in the context of Ethiopia, I can say because I was there, one message that was consistent from us to the aid community, the donors, was that while it is very much appreciated that there is immediate humanitarian assistance for hunger and drought, we are going to be here again, talking about the same issue in a couple of years. So therefore, it is very important, and through our research, through our work on the ground, highlighting the evidence that investment in resilience building is what is needed to, help communities break away from the cycle of constant dependence on aid and not having the time to recover from the previous disaster. And, I think the second area that we have been also looking at is engaging with the national government in Ethiopia with significant challenges because of the context there, but really, encouraging them to create an enabling environment where development partners could return back to carry out some of the work, long-term development work that they were doing previously, which were also contributing to building resilience. So I think apart from the work on the ground, these two things were also very critically done and continue to be our focus.
Yeah, that's brilliant. We've got a question on the side here, and while the mic moves there, I will ask Kudakwashe Praise another question. You spoke about Ubuntu and how important that is as a philosophy in the African context. Do you want to speak to the room about, is it okay for someone else to use this Ubuntu philosophy, and a little bit more about what it is and how it can impact how people see aid, resilience building, and working together?
Okay, thank you so much. So with Ubuntu, it's the idea that I am because you are. So every time when you wake up in my country, you say Mamuka say, you say it in plural, like how if you wake up, you don't, how if you like in plural. So you check on that person and the next person. So if you come, let's say, to where I grew up and ask me like, so how are you feeling? I would say like, we are okay. So if my environment is not okay, I'm also speaking, also connected to my environment. So the idea of Ubuntu, it's something that I would recommend probably the world. I think it's out there. And I was also looking at China's Confucianism, which also emphasizes about ethics, moralism, good behavior, and so forth. So the way people in Africa, let's say Zimbabwe, where I come from, how they see things, they think things should be done the right way. Because if you don't do things the right way, it will impact the next person. We actually have a name for someone who goes and urinate in the well, the source of water. We call those people like Nundramtsime. So when the Chinese like investments or aid comes through and end up like affecting those water sources, people would come up with terms to say like, Inundramtsime, which means they are now like bad boys. You get it? So with that concept, you are just saying like we have our own values, but these values are being taken away. So the way people understand things is if, let's say a development player is coming, they should also come within the trajectory of ethics, of moralism, just to make sure like we come up with for the common good. The ultimate end should be for the common good, not probably for one politician to pocket all the benefits. So it's something that I personally would advocate. And I'll give you the last example. I lost both parents when I was young, but because of the Ubuntu understanding in my country, my mother's sister became my mother. My dad's brother became my father. So I can hardly say like I'm an orphan, because within our society, it's not about individualism. It's about a collective society. So it takes a community to build a person. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, so perhaps there's a good way that globally we can have a Ubuntu, and I think everybody here at that conference, at this conference, probably has that mindset. Yeah, for your question.
Thank you so much. My name is Martina Travaglini from the Development Intelligence Lab. And my question is for Kudakwashe Mutukura as well, and it's related to the one that you just asked. I know that I lived in Zimbabwe for 2 years, and I found your presentation very interesting. And I know that a lot of these infrastructure projects and mining projects from China employ a lot of Chinese workers. And I was wondering if you could, like, if in your study you found something about the impact on the Chinese workers on the social relations in the communities. For example, I know that a lot of local people were employed also as translators, or also in some of the projects. Like, or how do this having foreign workers coming in these communities, particularly in the rural communities, impact the social cohesion? Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much for the question. So in my research, researching on human security, there's actually a dimension on economic security. So I did actually research about that. So I'll give you an incident. I'll give you later an incident that happened when I went to one of the Chinese lithium mining companies. So one thing that I must admit to you all is China is doing good or great work when it comes to employing Zimbabweans, apart from Chinese. A lot of people, they are working there, although they do have their complaints, like the wages, like it's not that much, you know, like you go there, there is no security. You work there and there is no contract. Anytime you can be fired. And what I'm saying right now, it's not like an imaginary thing, or probably I read it from Western funded journalists, like what they say in Zimbabwe. When I was doing my research, I was at this lithium mining company, and the boss at that company was angry because one of his drivers didn't offload one of their excavators very well. He was fired at that time. He was told to leave. So that was one of the examples. And the security guard who was at the gate, who allowed that person to go out, he was also fired to say, like, why did you let him go out? I didn't give you that instruction. And they didn't know by that time that I was doing my research. So I witnessed it. It's something that happened. So people now, when they look at China, they don't consider like how many Chinese are coming to do, like, let's say, the work. They are concerned about their welfare first. How are we treated in our country? That's the first. Then when it comes to the Chinese who are coming to work, I think it's not that much like typical for you to see like Chinese coming doing like ordinary work, but I would say like within a company, you rarely see a Chinese person probably doing this dirty work. They will become, let's say, the managers, regardless of their qualifications, whether they know or not. They will assume the senior or like those top positions. So I think that is some of the concerns that a lot of people are also facing. Then another thing, I think it's not proper for me to give like a verdict, because this relationship is still ongoing. It's still early for us to judge like this is how the Chinese are doing. But also it concerns the issue of communication. A lot of people who come working in Zimbabwe, they don't know how to speak English. Ways to say Shona. Shona is our local language, but the basics of English. So because of that, there's always conflicts with some of the ordinary workers. I think that's what I can say for now.
Thank you very much. If there are no last questions, there's a last question. We have time for a last question. Could we get the mic?
This is more of a remark, so maybe I saw a hand over there as well. That maybe there's the last question there. Just to thank you very much for sharing this in such an open way. I know that these things are uncomfortable. We'll have a session tomorrow in the morning on anti-rights actors, which is exactly about what you're talking about now in the region of the Indo-Pacific. The playbook is the same, so you will be recognizing a lot of things that you see back home. I hope that you can join and ask some difficult questions.
Thank you so much for that.
Hi, I'm Nick Venables from the Australian Pacific Training Coalition. Thank you to all the presenters, but my question's for Claire. It was great to see in your presentation, there was a bit about the locally led approach, and in particular, the 80% funding going to the civil society organizations. I was just interested if there was any particular challenges you found with that approach, and also interested in any interventions or suggestions you might have to build the capacity of the CSOs. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for the question. So that's part of the benefit, I guess, is that we work through organisations that we've worked with for a long time, but there's always challenges you have when working at community level. So part of the approach we take to that is having like a capacity strengthening plan that we have with the partner. So that'll go through and look at kind of key areas like disability, inclusion, gender, and that's financial management, things like that. And so that's kind of where we can step in and provide a bit of technical support to strengthen those areas around that. But also in Kenya, the AHN, the ASL Humanitarian Network, that's really a key body that kind of gets together with all of the NGOs and the local civil society organisations in that ASL region. And so they provide a lot of strengthening work together. So for example, one of the partners that we worked with, Pasita, they had a really strong disability inclusion focus, but some of the other partners didn't have that area of expertise, and so they were able to come together and provide like a bit of cross-learning in that space as well.
Great. I think we are coming to the end of our time. So if there's any panelist who has a burning last addition to add, you can stop me before I continue in closing the session and thanking everyone for coming, thanking the presenters, and thank you for the engagement. Please do come and chat to any of the presenters if you see us around the conference. Contact Dessie online if you'd like to stay in touch with them. And I didn't introduce myself in the beginning. My name is Estelle. I work for the Development Policy Center, so you'll see me around the conference. Thank you very much, everyone.